Thanks, Tom. And for today's keynote, when we first started thinking about who to invite from the Department of the Air Force, because again, we're very focused for this conference on actual implementation, I think the choice was pretty obvious, and that was Nicholas Shalon. For those in our audience who might not know him, he is the Air Force's chief software officer, and right now the driving force behind not just Cloud One, which a lot of people have heard of, but also Platform One, and I think a few different ones throughout the Air Force technology development world. And it's also important to point out, I think, that Platform One is not just an Air Force project at this point. It is an officially recognized DoD enterprise service. So at any rate, when it comes to the question of who in DoD has taken the idea of cloud computing into actual practice, it's hard to imagine a better spokesman for how to do it. So, Nicholas, we're glad to have you with us for this. Thanks for taking the time. Appreciate you being here.
No, thanks for having me.
And for you, I totally realize that cloud is not an end unto itself. Cloud One really is just one part of the whole DevSecOps ecosystem slash pipeline. But I do want to at least start there before we talk about that broader ecosystem that you've been building for software development. Give us some just initial observations on why cloud matters so much to this initiative as far as just the hosting environment and kind of your thoughts on why it's been relatively difficult for DoD until pretty recently to get applications and development work into that space.
Yeah, I think cloud is foundational to be able to move at the pace of relevance. But back to your point on the digital Air Force, if you want to be able to really embrace that pace and you want to be able to innovate and more importantly, be able to try things out and pilot things and use compute and storage and AI, machine learning, you need to have that elasticity of what clouds provide. And really, you piggyback on the multi-billion-dollar investment of the big cloud providers and effectively benefit from their innovation on hardware, on different new cloud services, APIs. But there's a caveat to that, right? Is something that I am particularly cautious about is the vendor lock-in that can come with that. And that's why when we designed Cloud One, we designed the entire stack to be cloud agnostic and abstracting the entire set of APIs. So when we build applications using Cloud One, we're not getting locked into some of these cloud providers, and we can effectively run the applications anywhere. That's including, on-premise, on jets and bombers and space systems at the edge. And it's foundational for our mission, right? It's not just about moving cool web apps and business apps to clouds. It's really building that rapid prototyping, innovation pipeline that will enable weapon systems to move to the cloud, to the edge, and really embracing that faster feedback loop between the warfighter and the development teams.
You mentioned that multi-cloud was important to you from the beginning. There have been some other large DoD enterprise cloud efforts that have taken the opposite path, basically with the thinking that it would be too hard to orchestrate multiple cloud providers into a coherent fabric. Did you find that to be a challenge at the beginning of this effort, and what did you do to overcome it?
I mean, look, it's all about timing too, right? If I had to make that decision 3 years ago, I could have had decided to make the same decision. The thing is, with technology, things change fast, right? And it's interesting that the time it takes us to do our contract acquisition process is putting us into trouble sometimes because, if we were to make the same decision again today, we would probably not make the same decision. And that's because technology evolved, and now it is much easier, particularly with the adoption of Kubernetes, part of the Cloud Native Computing Foundation, which bring that abstraction, right, and that streamlining that complexity of orchestration across cloud providers at the edge. And it's not just across clouds. It's for us, people need to realize we need to run that software on weapons and embedded systems. And that's the real mission of DoD. The mission of DoD is not just to build business systems, it's to build weapons. And the business systems are critical to support that outcome. But the fact is the priority must be on the weapons. And that's why when I started, I demonstrated that within 45 days, we could put, Kubernetes on F-16 jets on legacy hardware that's 20 years old, because we wanted to prove to people that, hey, if we can do this with these kind of embedded systems and weapons, we can do it for anything.
At the risk of asking an obvious question, can you just say a little bit more about why you decided multiple options within Cloud One were important for the Air Force and for your customers?
I think it's foundational for everything. I mean, first of all, diversity of options, not getting locked in, being able to make sure that, in 2, 3, 4, 5 years, 10 years from now, who knows who is going to be innovating, leading. You need to have options. You need to also, put fuel on the fire of competition. If a company feel complacent because they have pretty much a monopoly of cloud in the department, by definition, they're going to invest less and be innovating less around that enclave. And keep in mind, because we mandate government enclaves, we are already shooting ourselves in the foot by having less diversity, less physical locations, which puts us at risk in terms of a physical attack or cyber attack when it comes to a bad actor potentially going after our cloud. And so effectively, when you think about it, you need high availability, you need diversity, you need options, you need competition, you need to move fast. It's all the right reasons to think about a multi-cloud strategy, and that's really what DoD CIO has been pushing. In the last 2 years. It's a multi-cloud vision, and that's why we have 13 cloud in DoD, which Cloud One is obviously one of the more prominent option, having that capability at scale, DoD scale, and not just supporting one team of the department. I think the Army with Sea Army is also building that cloud capability as well. And the Navy obviously is piggybacking on the investment made on Platform One and Cloud One.
With all those initiatives kind of going on in parallel, I wonder how much risk there is of reinventing the wheel, creating duplication. And to what extent, when you were building Cloud One, did you think of it as an enterprise service to be consumed by non-Department of the Air Force customers?
Yeah, when I started in DoD, for me, it was very critical coming from the commercial side. It was pretty clear to me that, we had to work as a team, and the competing nations like China and Russia and North Korea, all the focus here, and not, fights between the Navy, the Army, and the Air Force. And so effectively, I could never really understand why there were so many silos across the department. And look, we're a very large enterprise, probably the largest in the world. So it does make sense to have options. At the same time, some diversity sometimes create issues to then interconnect things. If you look at JADC2 and ABMS, effectively by having sometimes too much diversity, maybe silos, that creates issues in terms of integrating things together and being successful, by the way, in our mission. Because the fact is, when you fight a war, you're not thinking, about your assets in silos. You're thinking of how to put them together to win those battles. And so effectively, you're now destroying these silos and trying to move faster. And so at the end of the day, for us, what really matters is there are a few things that, are so foundational, particularly around cybersecurity, identity management, to have a single sign-on experience for the warfighter so we can authenticate once and not have to type, pins and passwords 20 million times a day. These kind of basic things is what define an enterprise versus, a bunch of disparate systems, and that's just not making our lives successful and efficient to win that war.
Just one more beat on Cloud One before we move on to how it fits into the broader DevSecOps ecosystem. Talk to us a little bit more about what's actually moved there, what's hosted there, because as you said, it is not just websites and business applications at this point.
Yeah, we have dozens of business applications, obviously, very large efforts. We created the first zero trust stack, what we call the cloud native access point, which enables access to the cloud from anywhere, including obviously being remote on personal devices, non-government furnished equipment. that is what has enabled the department to move at the pace of relevance when it comes to COVID. And despite COVID, we were able to continue our progression to the cloud thanks to the CNAP. And so we have also moved all of Platform One, obviously on Cloud One, which has all of the top ACAT 1, ACAT 2 large DoD programs, software intensive, from F-35 to the Joint AI Center JAIC to GBSD to all of the bomber work, space work. So it's really becoming the central place to build software, to do rapid testing, automated testing, digital engineering stack, all the automation we're building to do modeling and simulation, so we don't have to bend metal before trying things out digitally. All that stack is on Cloud One as well. So really, we're talking nuclear, space, jets, bombers. The Navy obviously has Aegis and other programs in a partnership also with Cloud One and Platform One. So it's becoming really the significant side of DoD now moved effectively to clouds. And of course, there's always going to be this embedded use case, because at the end of the day, the software is going to run on these weapons. So there's a need to have a digital twin on the cloud to emulate the entire stack. And then there's that physical system and the need to run the hardware in the loop testing on that hardware, and automating the push from the cloud to the on-premise environments to do that automated hardware in the loop testing. If you compare with a SpaceX that has only 200 developers for the 9 platforms of SpaceX, 80% of the code is reused across the 9 platforms. Effectively, they made it very modular and reusable Lego blocks, so they can reuse a lot of the code across platforms. And they can do 17,000 build of software a day, 3 hardware in the loop testing automated a day on the hardware, and they can change the software the day before the launch. That's where we want to be. That's the goal. That's a North Star for us.
Perfect transition to start talking a little bit more about Platform One and how the ones fit together. I should have asked before, but some of our viewers may not have seen the logo that is your virtual background. I think that's the official, or maybe the semi-official Platform One logo.
Official,
Tell us
official.
What it is. It's official. Okay, so what is it?
It's official.
What is it? And what does it mean?
We have a fancy logo. So, we obviously have Smokey the Bear and Baby Yoda, and it's kind of showing the innovation, the learning, the continuous learning, and of course the prevention, back to the Smokey the Bear fire campaign in forests. So it's kind of putting everything together in terms of prevention for cyber, baked in security, but also innovation with Baby Yoda becoming, Yoda. So it's very interesting to see kind of the culture, right, and how much the department is embracing that new rapid prototyping, continuous learning, fail fast but don't fail twice for the same reason, learn fast. That is how you innovate, right? You will not find ways to innovate if you're not failing. It's just very important to define what failing means. The issue is people automatically assume in DoD that the plane has to crash, or the nuclear ICBM has to detonate, which is obviously never what we want, unless we want to. But again, the point is to fail small incremental changes to learn fast. And it's not big failure of waterfall old use cases where you used to spend 3 to 5 years to realize after that amount of time and a lot of taxpayer money wasted, that what you build does not meet the requirement of the warfighter or does not resonate with the mission. And so effectively, by being able to innovate incrementally fast and learning fast, you can see if you're going and you're headed to the right direction and adjust as needed by having this fast feedback loop with the warfighter and the development teams, so we can learn fast.
And the bottom half of the logo there, the text, which people probably can't fully see, is in Yoda ease, waterfall only you can prevent. Talk a bit more about how specifically Platform One helps people develop in a non-waterfall way.
Yeah, I mean, obviously we're embracing Agile, and that's really the foundation of everything we do with DevSecOps. Agile, funny enough, I mean, I started my career back on the commercial side. I was 15. I'm 36 years old now, so it's been 21 years. And I was pretty much already doing Agile when I started. Unfortunately, the department has been stuck in this waterfall construct for decades, and it's been a tough move, right? Because even when they tried to implement Agile, the issue is we're falling back into what we knew, particularly because some of the reporting structure to Congress and acquisition teams are very much still looking at this in a waterfall construct, very much being stuck in what I call the water agile fall nightmare, which you have all the impediments of waterfall and all the impediments of agile, but pretty much none of the benefits. And so that's obviously not what we want. We want to move to that agile construct end to end for every piece of the program management, acquisition, and the culture of this, and the need also for Congress and the rest of the department when it comes to monitoring budget spends, that we need to understand that we need to have these big, broader set of line items in budget that will be then assigned to dynamic work. If you look at how a company innovates, they don't set budget 2 years ahead for specific projects. They're going to set innovation budget, and then they're going to dig into bigger, broader themes. Those themes will be cut into projects, almost the same year, if not sometimes month to month, to try things out, innovate. And by the way, you don't get day one a 5, 10, 20, 100, 200, $500 million budget when you get started. The key for new teams should be to have this kind of seed funding to demonstrate what they can build and then grow by delivering capability that resonates with the leadership, right, and the warfighter. And so it's very much a startup mindset of growth, right? So you don't end up overspending or already being in this kind of nightmare of bureaucracy where you have so much money that you're now forced to slow down because of the churn it takes to move that massive machine around you. And so, Platform One has been supporting some of the largest DoD weapons. It's a learning curve for most of these teams. Some have obviously different maturity model. We've been leading, with several jets, with F-16, GBSD, and others. F-35 is now also piggybacking on Platform One as well. It's a journey, right? But it's a critical journey because people need to realize you cannot build software in 2021 without DevSecOps, without Agile, and without these kind of key principles.
Let's dig in a bit more to the sec portion of that DevSecOps mentality, because it goes so critically with everything you were just talking about being agile, because the requirements for security and the desire for security are not going to go away. So it's just going to slow you down if you can't do security in an agile way too. I think a big part of that in Platform One is the continuous ATO process, which you are using there. Talk about what it is, how it's working, what it's been applied to so far.
Yes, I'm also the chair of the DoD Security Authorization Working Group, the DSOG, for DevSecOps, and I'm promoting this kind of continuous ATO work across the department, making it the default for software. And so the continuous ATO is foundational to the success of Platform One. That's how we can release software multiple times a day. Platform One is now releasing software 21 times a day. And the reason why we didn't call DevSecOps SecDevOps or DevOpsSec or whatever is because security is not first. I'm a cyber guy, but I'm also a developer. And if you talk to cyber guys, they're going to tell you, well, cybersecurity should come first. That's nonsense. Period. Unless you're building a cyber product, you're never going to think of cyber first. You're going to think of what you're trying to build and what you're aiming to do. No one just wakes up and thinks of cybersecurity unless you're building a cyber product. And so effectively, cybersecurity has to be baked in, and that's why it's at the center. It's not an afterthought. It's not the first thought. It's not the last thought. It's baked in. And so DevSecOps for us is about reducing that risk and and bringing a baked-in security using the principles of zero trust, behavioral detection in continuous monitoring, so we can reduce risk. We can obviously use the traditional scanning and the traditional DevOps methods to scan code and do all the basic scanning with signatures. But the fact is there are so many 0 days and new issues that you just can't keep up. And so by definition, zero trust will limit what the system can do and what can each container talk to. So container A would have to be whitelisted to talk to container B, which reduces the attack surface of a bad actor. If they were to get into one container, effectively they can laterally move into the entire stack. But then the behavioral detection will look at drifts of behavior. And if the container starts doing things it's never done before, it's very likely a bad actor got access to one of the containers trying to laterally move into the next system. And so by definition, by detecting behavior and killing the container in runtime is how we mitigate that threat again, reducing the attack surface obviously drastically. So those are the foundation of DevSecOps, and the continuous ATO piggybacks on the software factory work. So it's all about having gates in your pipeline, change management gates, cyber gates, and testing gates. And that continuous monitoring zero trust construct is the foundation of all of that. And then if your code passes the gates and is able to meet those thresholds, you can release to production.
Right. And so as far as how continuous ATO actually works from an authorization and accreditation standpoint, because we're bureaucracy nerds here, you accredit the platform, right? So all of the security features that you just talked about are what leads to that accreditation, so that you don't need a separate authorizing official's eyes on every piece of code that comes out of the platform. Is that about right?
Yeah, that's correct. We accredit we call it authorize now, I guess. We authorize the platform, which is the factory. We define the gates of that factory. So like I said, change management gates, testing gates, and cyber gates. Those have thresholds that each authorizing official can decide to set the bar. For example, you could say for nuclear systems, you need to have 100% test coverage. So 100% of your code has to be covered by tests. Some business system might say 50, 60, 70% is good enough, right? And those gates will define if you pass the pipeline. And now each piece of software that you're pushing through that pipeline, assuming it's passing those gates, gets this automated certificate to field to release that software in product staging and then production if it passes all the tests. And so that's effectively what you're talking about. It's authorizing the platform, defining the gates, and there's a third pillar that we have also that we didn't talk about, which is training the team, both training the team that's running the factory and the team that's building software using the factory, which, by the way, is foundational to why Platform One is so important. We didn't talk about that, but when I started, we had dozens of teams building platforms from scratch, costing millions, and also often a year or 2 years of time and a lot of energy spent on building platforms just so they can build their mission software, moving that focus away from the mission, again, to what should be commodity. And so Platform One is bringing that DevSecOps managed service to any DoD program turnkey with different options and not a one-size-fits-all, which was also very foundational to why we built the stack as it is, so we don't have the impediment of some of the old-school enterprise services of DoD that only bring a one-size-fits-all mentality.
I do want to talk about software factories and how they're using Platform One a little bit later, but just to stick on security a little bit more here, I'm wondering how central the cloud infrastructure is to what you're talking about here. How much of that baked-in cybersecurity is actually inherited from the commercial environment? I mean, theoretically, a lot of what you're talking about could be done in a, I'll say, legacy hosting environment, but how much does it help you to be getting the security features that come with commercial cloud?
Yeah, we actually cut the DevSecOps layers into multiple layers. The first one is the infrastructure layer. That could be a cloud provider, that could be on-premise, that could be an edge system, embedded system. And then we're going to put Kubernetes on top for the platform. We're going to put our continuous integration, continuous delivery pipeline completely containerized on top of that. And then we're going to put a service mesh, which is the cyber stack that's going to enforce zero trust. And then you have the application all the way at the top, which inherits effectively 90% of the NIST cybersecurity controls. So effectively, you're drastically reducing the work per team. But we also wanted to make sure that the controls were met regardless if you're running on the cloud or without a cloud. So effectively, a lot of the controls are provided by the platform and the service mesh. You'll see that we can effectively run platform one anywhere at the edge or on a weapon system and still meet those controls. You're correct by stating that clouds are effectively helping a lot when it comes to inheritance of these controls. But we also wanted and needed to make sure that we could be compliant and secure without the cloud layer. And so we had to abstract a lot of that as well. So a lot of the cybersecurity we build around it and the controls effectively are agnostic to the environment.
That's actually really interesting. I'd not been tracking that. So are there actual plans or genuine use cases to run Platform One in an on-prem or tactical edge scenario?
Yeah, I mean, when we deployed, Kubernetes on jets, when we do hardware in the loop testing on the hardware, we have to run it on premise, right? It has to run where the weapon is or where the actual software is going to be deployed. And so, in fact, we have hundreds of instances of Platform One being deployed anywhere, be at the facilities of some of the primes and the defense industrial base. It could be all the way to on the jet or the space system, so we can run containers and Lego blocks on those embedded systems as well.
You mentioned earlier that the reporting chain to Congress really is not well suited to anything we're discussing here. It strikes me that the planning, budgeting, and execution rules around all DoD money really are not designed for software, not designed for IT at all, you could argue. Talk about what you had to do to get money for these things, for Cloud One, for Platform One, to get them off the ground, considering those kind of structural impediments in budgeting.
Yeah, well, finally we managed to become officially now a program of record. We got a great material leader with Brian Viola that just started 2 weeks ago. So Platform One is now part of the big boys and finally officially a program of record. But for a year and a few months, it was functioning through funding by consumption, and that's, by the way, very interesting because I do believe that for enterprise services to be efficient and to think as an enterprise and as a company, and when I think of Platform One and the services that Platform One provides to the department, I'm thinking as an entrepreneur again, which is what my background is. I founded 12 companies. And so I'm always thinking, okay, Platform One has customers, right? And providing services. Some are free services, some are paid services. And so it makes a lot of sense to have a central pot of money to fund and keeping the lights on, but then having a consumption-based funding to grow. Effectively, you cannot become bloated and you cannot fail as a service provider if you don't have paying customers and if you don't meet their requests and demands and the other customers, not the other way around, right? And so when we started, we only had consumption funding, so we had to go and convince some of the big DoD programs, and we started with big ones like GBSD and F-35 and others. And we went and tackled some of the biggest problems, and I realized pretty quickly that 90% of these programs were trying to do the same thing. And effectively, we're just paying 20 times for the same thing. So we ended up saving, on average, for ACAT 1 programs, $12.5 million of taxpayer money by consolidating this work into Platform One. And that's how we funded everything. We merged this work, and we took over the creation of the platform, and we delivered an MVP, a minimum viable product, and that's how we grew. And now finally we have a PE, and we have a central Air Force funding. But I made it clear to the leadership that's only to keep the lights on. We don't want to become bloated. We don't want to become a bureaucracy. And so the rest of the money is still paid by consumption.
Yeah, I was just about to go there because it seems like there is a risk that if the program over the long term can lean on dedicated program of record funding, not only does it get bloated, but it removes incentives or lessens incentives to innovate if you're not just relying on competitive pressure to compete for customers to keep the lights on. Do you see that as a risk 5 years from now? And if so, how do you mitigate that?
Yeah, everything has the pros and cons, right? I mean, the risk also when you rely on consumption funding is if one of your big program gets cut for whatever reason, then you lose a big chunk of money, and then you cannot provide the service for the rest of the customers, which could put the entire thing at risk. So there is balances, and you need to find the right fit. I think having a central pot of money to build the basic services and keeping the lights on and setting up the team is great, and that's what we're doing with a central core piece of funding, and then having consumption funding with a baked-in tax for innovation. So each customer effectively, by the way, is still saving money compared to what they would have to do if they were to try to do the same thing. Not only to save a year of time if they were trying to do that, but they also save actual tangible money. But then there's a tax with quotes. Baked in to help fund the next generation innovation of platform, and otherwise you're stuck in time. So by having that tax, you can have room for innovation. That's how, by the way, we created the cloud native access point, which is how the department now is going to use clouds and even connect to Nipper and Zipper, replacing VPNs.
Yeah, I'd love to hear more about the cloud native access points. I'm glad you brought it up. People have heard of cloud access points in the DoD context. I think historically they mainly serve to be bottlenecks to the cloud. How are these different? How do they actually work?
Yeah, I was a little shocked. I'm not going to lie. When I started first at DHS, when I looked at the tick and then the cap, which are pretty much the same concept. It's bottlenecks bringing all the traffic back on premise to then flow to the cloud. It just makes no sense. You're effectively creating a massive bottleneck. You just summarized it. And it was initially mostly to inject cyber capabilities, thinking, well, we're going to have control of that pipe and we can see what's going on. The fact is we can do this on the cloud now, and that's why we created a cloud native access point, which is cloud agnostic, elastic, completely automated push button deployment, so we can instantiate it anywhere, including on premise. By the way, it's not because it's cloud native that it means it cannot run on premise, right? Of course, it ideally needs modern compute and modern data centers, but the fact is the CNAP is now going to be running on Nipper at the base to replace VPNs. And really what the CNAP is also bringing is not only disrupting that bottleneck concept of perimeter, but moving to zero trust. So effectively, it's going to assess the device state of the user using whatever device, whether it's a mobile or desktop, laptop, and allow the user, based on his identity or her identity and the device state that she or he is using, to connect to DoD systems. And based on the component risk of the device state, so it's checking to see if the device is patched and the settings of the device, based on the component risk of who the user is and the device being used, is gonna whitelist access to resources on the cloud and on premise, effectively doing that egress to the cloud, and that's game changing. And we're supporting Linux, Mac OS, Windows, iOS, Android, and then we have VDI options with zero clients, so people can just VDI into the cloud and have access to a Windows or Linux desktop.
And just to stick with the cloud native access points for a second here, I'm not sure I totally have my mind wrapped around how they work, but do they help solve some of the scalability problem that DoD has historically had in getting access to the cloud through those gateway points between Nipper and commercial?
Yeah, I guess what I forgot to mention is the CNAP is effectively hosted on the cloud, so it's not on premise, and so we put them where where we want them to be closest to the edge. So we could put them anywhere from on-premise to a cloud or to the edge. Is designed to run where it's supposed to connect to, and it's elastic, so it's going to auto scale based on consumption. So obviously, it's going to be limited based on the hardware you have. But if you're on the cloud, which we have the CNAP running both on Amazon and Azure, you can have that elasticity baked into Amazon and Azure. So effectively, we were able to go from 10 users to 50,000 users during COVID overnight.
Zero Trust has come up a couple times. We haven't gotten too deeply into it yet. You mentioned it's got a role in the cloud native access points in assigning access to users. How baked in is Zero Trust to Platform One, Cloud One, everything? How much have you implemented of it?
Yeah, the Zero Trust is the foundation of DevSecOps. Period. It's why we call it SAC of DevSecOps and continuous ATO and CNAP and everything else. It's really the new way of. I mean, I don't know if it's that new anymore because Great Google with Beyond Corp created this maybe 5-6 years ago now, and it's really the way to think about how to secure your systems. Thinking of this perimeter defense is just completely obsolete. By definition, you're going to have either an insider threat or you're going to have a malware that's going to give a foothold, or a 0-day is going to give a foothold into the network, and now you'll have no limitation, no security to prevent the bad actor to laterally move to the crown jewels of the network. And for us, Zero Trust is what we call ingress, egress, but also east-west traffic. So ingress, egress is a CNAP. That's what controls access and getting inside or leaving the environment or the cloud. And that's really checking the device state and the user identity using strong identities, and based on the component risk, that's how you get access to the enclave and the resources within that enclave based on need to know. And then we have a service mesh. We use Istio in the department, but the service mesh is what is doing the east-west traffic. So for container A to talk to B, it has to be whitelisted. So effectively, let's say you have a 0-day in one of the containers because you're using maybe an open source or commercial product that has a 0-day. If the bad actor gets access to one of the containers, he can only talk to what is whitelisted, effectively limiting the attack surface. He's not going to be able to talk to the entire network like he could on a VPN.
Want to go back to software factories that came up briefly earlier. People have heard of a couple of them, like Kessel Run and Kobayashi Maru, but there's like a dozen of them now, maybe more at this point. They've really proliferated. Yeah. Talk a bit about what they're doing, and is everybody kind of on side now in terms of all using the same platform instead of rolling their own, as you kind of alluded to earlier?
So we have many software teams, software factory teams. We have Tron, we have Ski Camp, Space Camp, Turtle Camp. I mean, you name it. We have a bunch of camps. We have pretty much everybody has a cool, fancy logo and name. That's awesome. Different mission. Bespin is doing business systems. Kessel Run, obviously with AOC and F-35 work, and Auden. Kobayashi for the Space Force, Space Camp, Space Force as well. So Ski Camp for GBSD and F-16 and others. So we have, dozens of great teams now. Many are using Platform One. Obviously, the legacy, what I call the legacy software factories like Kessel Run and Kobayashi Maru, it's a journey, right? They have existing workload. They're going to move. It's going to take time. Some were using technology that were pre-Kubernetes, so it's a heavier lift to move to Platform One and requires some rewriting of code. And there was some lock-in aspect to what we were doing before I got here. So we addressed that with Platform One in terms of diversity of platforms as well, right? So we're not getting locked into a cloud, but we also don't want to get locked into a DevSecOps stack. So abstraction of that as well is foundational for Platform One. So, it's a journey. It's going to take probably another, I would say, year and a half to get to a point where everybody is really fully embracing and using the enterprise DevSecOps stack.
As we start to wind down here, I want to talk a bit about workforce issues here, the people who are actually working on those teams. And as you've pushed people out of the waterfall mentality into the DevSecOps Agile mentality, how hard has it been to find people who are well versed in working in that way, or getting people's mindsets to change so that they can work in that way? How's that all going?
I think most people are willing to change. And honestly, I think that the biggest issue is when people say culture is hard and tech is easy. It's wrong, by the way. It's a lie. Usually that's said by people that are absolutely not technical and don't understand the complexity of the technology out there. But it's also wrong because effectively the reason why culture is hard is because tech is hard too. And the pace of IT requires to reinvent yourself almost now once a year. What used to be every 5-10 years is now almost yearly. And look, not everyone is able or capable of that kind of pace. When you find IT teams that are passionate about IT, and I'm one of those. Created my company. I was 15 and coding at 7 and whatever. Right? That's what I like to do. Right? I'm a geek, I guess. Right? And when you love it, you're gonna want to learn and you're gonna want to keep up. But when you just are doing this because it's just a job for you, right? It's a different kind of mentality. And so, the continuous learning aspect of this, I can tell you, is foundational. That's why we give an hour a day to our people at Platform One to learn, so we can keep up and making sure they're not becoming stale. So I think, by the way, the biggest and most important aspect of your question is not so much finding people that already know these new technologies and Agile and stuff. That's great. But honestly, what I'm mostly looking for is people that can learn in a self-learning environment. Because let's face it, we cannot train the trainer and then train people at that kind of pace. We just can't keep up. No certification, no schools, university, whatever, will be able to keep up. We have 100,000 people to train a year. You cannot do that if you're not bringing a self-learning construct. So we partnered with the Linux Foundation, the CNCF, and already the books to bring unbiased training content, which, by the way, is critical too, because you find a lot of content out there that are pushing for one specific product. So you want to find that, unbiased content, and that's how we help these teams to move to the new set of reality of innovation. And I can tell you it's a continuous, never-ending journey. So even if you were to find people that have the best skills today, if you let them get stale within 6 months, you effectively shoot yourself in the foot and did not enable your talents to remain at the top of the curve.
Well, also, and it strikes me that the more DoD moves to the agile practices that the rest of the world is actually using today, the less limited you are in recruiting people, because you don't have to find people who know how to develop software the DoD way. It's just a software developer.
The normal way.
Yeah, the normal way.
Yeah, and look, by the way, if you look at the reason why SpaceX was able to move so fast in space and are using specific space hardware and IP, it's all open source or common TCP/IP and normal software stuff. That's how they get to use the normal software capabilities and tools and DevSecOps tools, and they don't have to create secret sauce everything. And then you're spot on, right? Effectively, that's how you get more diversity, more options of tools, more options of companies supporting you, more options to find talent. And by the way, our mission is pretty exciting. So we, despite the fact that, look at SpaceX, they're probably paying 20% less than other companies in California, and yet they have no issue attracting talent, right? So it's not all about pay. Of course, DoD is a little bit more than 20%, sometimes, even 100% less than, what someone would be making, even more sometimes, right? And that's a problem. We do have to tackle the pay grade issue, and particularly the progress of pay over years, because the issue is we have these few mechanisms to create bonuses and signing bonuses and stuff, but that doesn't get you to scale. Effectively, someone is going to stay for 2, 3, 4 years, and then then you don't have an answer anymore, which could be good to create some type of rotating set of talent back to industry, back to DoD, back to industry. That makes sense too. But the fact is, we also need to retain talent. And the issue that I see though is quite honestly a lot of the people that do great work at Platform One, they get pushed by the big commercial companies, because quite honestly, for once, and I don't think it's my ego talking, for once, DoD is leading in DevSecOps, and a lot of organizations are looking at what Platform One is doing and trying to effectively use it. We open source all the work of Platform One on Repo One, and anyone can go and use that code. And when people, I've seen this in financial sector, healthcare, and other agencies, and across even countries, right? UK, Canada, many countries, Japan reach out to us and start to use pieces of Platform One. I think we're creating a momentum, right? A community, an open source community. It's probably the largest, by the way, open source community engagement of history. Lockheed Martin just announced they're going to put 6 people full time in that open source community at no cost to the government, and going to be using Platform One code for all new DevSecOps work across Lockheed, whether or not it is for DoD. That's the kind of impact we're making.
Well, Nicholas, there's about a million other things I could ask you about here, but unfortunately, we're going to have to leave it right about there for time. It's been a fascinating discussion. I really want to thank you for taking the time to talk to us today on the DoD Cloud Exchange. Appreciate it.
Thanks for having me.
Nicholas Shalon is the Air Force Chief Software Officer, one of our 3 keynotes to kick off 3 days of the DoD Cloud Exchange. That's going to do it for this discussion. Thanks very much for joining us, and Tom, we'll send it back to you in the studio.